Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of Crit Hit Reviews, with your host, Arlyeon. On today's episode, I'll be talking about a game I stumbled into, specifically Giant Games Strategic Card Battler, Night of the Full Moon. Find out if I thought this deck-building dive into the dark woods was a fairy tale experience, or if it left me seeing red. As it stands, the titular game starts off in a sleepy little village, the likes of which happens to border the not-so-scenic dark forest. The best of times, these ominous woods are rife with cursed creatures and the dire denizens of darkness. But on the night of the full moon, an even greater malevolence festers, which is definitely a problem for Little Red Riding Hood, whose grandmother has gone missing. Admittedly, the overall vibe I got was someone playing Mad Libs with fairy tales, and yet, even despite the minor hiccups that crop up in the quality of writing, I find it charming. And the way it implemented its narrative was fairly interesting to boot. See, as you progress through the game's basic difficulty, a post-combat conversation will sometimes occur which serves a few purposes. In essence, they play sort of like a short-lived choose-your-own-adventure, providing mechanical benefits or potential ramifications. I'll admit, I didn't quite know what to make of it at first, since the outcomes are sometimes a bit hard to predict, but the game also allows you to remember what each dialogue option you've picked does, both rewarding exploration, as well as helping you make more informed decisions. And considering that you do need to balance out certain dialogue-oriented options to change which final boss and ending you'll achieve, this helped a lot. That said, once you get past normal mode and start exploring hard mode, there is far less in the way of dialogue, save the basic flavor that accompanies each ending. At least until you manage to clear it on its final difficulty to fight the true last boss and get that ending. This formula of having a dialogue-centric normal mode also extends to the game's Diary DLC, though it eschews the main game's reputation and bravery systems, which dictated what final boss you'd encounter. At the same time, it still does have a variety of ending scenes and bosses to encounter, as well as a final boss to challenge in its most punishing difficulty mode. All the same, I actually felt the bestiary ended up helping a lot in filling in the blanks and making the story a fair bit more coherent. It just also did a pretty good job at making me feel like a complete bully for clobbering the cryptids that crossed my path. So, mostly, I try not to think about it, since I rather enjoy committing grievous acts of violence. That said, I'll be the first to admit that whilst it does aspire towards being a strategic card game, it didn't quite feel as tightly wound as some of its peers. See, where some titles would have you slowly working your way through your deck and thereby ensuring that you'll be able to partly predict your pulls, there's a large element of randomness in Night of the Full Moon, since your deck entirely reshuffles every hand. So, you can expect to sometimes spend a few solid rounds of combat pulling terrible cards round after round. Suffice to say, since you can retain cards up to your maximum hand size between rounds, I found it eminently important to just sit on bad hands, if only so the next time I'd pull up fresh cards, the odds of them actually being good was vastly improved. And also, suffice to say, the early game feels a bit clunky. At least until I could fuss around with my deck to make it a bit more well-honed, which made me rather grateful that it wasn't exactly permadeath. See, if you happen to lose a fight, you aren't just instantly punted out back to the main menu, but instead have the option of redoing the fight. You'll still be as wounded or the like as you started, but it does provide you the option of potentially squeaking through combat encounters where you might have normally hit a dead end after drawing a perfect storm of terrible cards, or inversely, provides the opportunity to snag that ideal first hand if you're hunting down certain achievements. Considering that each combat encounter is unique, and some have some altogether brutal mechanics to adapt to, both in general as well as for certain builds, I'll entirely admit that this ability to retry has saved a good number of runs. That said, a lot more relied simply on becoming familiar with the various kits you have at your disposal. See, Red has a few different styles of gameplay, essentially character classes you pick at the outside which influence what cards are in her deck, and starting abilities, like the Knight's capacity to upgrade a card occasionally, or the Ranger being able to just generate a random chest. That said, there's also active combat abilities you'll acquire as you gain levels in a run. Whilst they do tend to have hefty cooldowns until they're usable again, they can provide some fairly decisive buffs, such as outright damage negation for a turn, influencing the cost of cards, or even temporarily cloning a card. Though I guess it's not just Red's playstyle, since whilst a number of the game's DLC are different styles for Red, one of them allows you to dive into the boots of the little woodcutter, who happens to be able to channel his inner furious furry. That's right, you get to basically be a not-so-big bad wolf, with his own unique ending to boot. Ultimately, there's a lot of different ways to run through the game, both through the different deck types at large, as well as various strategies you can orchestrate with them on their own, but it's navigating the game's hard mode that's apt to serve as the largest time sink. Whilst it does eschew the story elements from the basic mode, it provides a far more streamlined and challenging experience to navigate. And what's more, it serves to gradually unlock more blessings for players to stumble across. I feel I probably should mention a bit about the game's diary mode at this juncture as well, if only because it's a whole side game onto itself, as it thrusts players into a relatively linear gauntlet of encounters, albeit with some rather specific modifiers. Unlike the main game, there's only 4 of the kits available to rampage around, but each of these in turn have special artifacts you're granted, which completely change up how they function. Factor in some unique cards for this mode, all new monsters and bosses, and permanently unlockable set of buffs you can assign to your character at the start of a run, and you have this segment of the game. I found it to be deceptively large, and the act of getting through to the ending on one character took me a fair bit of time. What's more, you're actually able to unlock the ability to use the cards and upgrades from this segment in the main game, which can actually be a whole lot of fun. Now, when it comes to the game's visuals, Night of the Full Moon has a rather distinct style. Your adversaries are generally adorable aesthetically, bearing a sort of creepy cute chic to them. The animations for the game's various cards are nice as well, alongside the shifts to their design as you improved upon them. That said, if you do manage to get an excessive amount of card draw, it can be a bit difficult to actually discern what cards are in your hand, as things get quite cluttered. Also, one of the DLCs comes with a cute little puzzle segment, and honestly, I found them to be endearing, doubly so just because when they're finished, they are lightly animated. Anyways, move on to its sound design, and that actually managed to deliver, with a delightfully eerie soundtrack that serves your adventure well. What's more, I genuinely hadn't expected there to be bits of voice work for the various encounters, which helped add a bit more flavor to them overall. Anyways, that wraps up the long, so let's get to the short. And frankly, whilst it's not a flawless title, I remain fond of it all the same. Enough so that I really enjoyed the process of running through the game as the various classes and felt practically obliged to pick up all the DLC just so I could try out all it had to offer. Overall, I'd consider the game a surprising hit, especially since I found myself playing it over and over again until I'd conquered the hardest difficulty for both the main title as well as the Diaries DLC. Anywho, thanks for tuning in. If you agree, disagree, or just have something to say to me, feel free to comment. And for those interested in more indie reviews, developer interviews, podcasts, or our Monday TTRPG content, hit the subscribe button and the bell so you know when there's a new release. There's also a Discord, which you can click the link in the banner or description. You can be part of our community, the Crit Hit Cauldron. Lastly, if you'd like to help support the channel, we do have a coffee running now to help supplement funds for our lovely editor, and make sure we continue to provide quality content. Again, check the description and the banner for them links. That said, I'll catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks.